I wish Restream would let me just keep beats going the whole time that I'm broadcasting because I'd feel a lot better. My name is James DiFiore. Welcome to Blackballed. Today we have Mubin Shaikh, who's been on the Dean Blundell show a bunch of times. I had him on Blackballed last year. And we're going to talk to him today about whether or not there's any extremist elements inside the convoy, how serious they are. I am considered, I think, the moderate on the Dean Blundell show. But at the same time, I'm willing to just be told, what's happening from people that are experts. So we have one on the show today. Mubin, what's up, man? How are you?
How you doing? Yeah, if you would have kept the
Good.
music going, our interview would have turned into a rap battle
Oh,
interview
I would have kicked your
style.
ass, buddy. I would have fucking kicked your ass. I don't play when it comes to that
All
shit.
right, all right. Gangsta.
We have been now in convoy hell, covering it anyways for what, 3 weeks, maybe a month. And when I look online, even when I look at some of the work of my colleagues, I stiffen a little because I'm trying to like maintain some sort of sense of like proportion, I think. And I am curious if you can just tell me how serious are these alleged extremists that are embedded inside this convoy, and are we not doing enough to fight it?
Yeah. Well, in the we kept hearing about how we should not paint the entire convoy with the same brush. But the problem with that is that the convoy organizers themselves are extremists. I mean, they are not part of any real regular or normative political process. James Botter, for example, he's a QAnon guy. Benjamin Dicker or Diker, I don't know how you pronounce his last name,
Ben Dichter.
Dich,
Yeah.
Dichter.
Dichter.
All
Yeah, he
right,
puts the dick in Dichter, apparently.
right.
Yeah.
So he's made some like anti-Muslim statements. Jason LaFace, whatever. He's linked to Soldiers of Odin. Tamara Litch, well-known Wexit founder, Alberta separatist. Pat King, he's got many videos on there talking about the Anglo-Saxon race as he sees it. So the convoy organizers are one, not truckers. Two, are openly posting bigoted, racist, anti-Semitic statements. So if the convoy organizers are like this, then how can we not paint the participants of the convoy with the same brush? This idea that these are exceptions to the rule, and there's just a few people here, whatever. If you've been following any attempts by major media corporations, CTVs, CBC, you name it, they're all getting harassed incessantly by these people downtown. I mean, they come on camera, they interfere with the coverage, they swear on camera, they have middle fingers posted, and this is everywhere. I mean, it's funny how some media, are trying to, I think, launder the image of the convoy organizers as well as the participants. But yet, when they go out there, they get hammered, not in the good way. Um, so so yeah,
Yeah,
it
we
is.
talked about that on the Dean Blundell show the other day about and I was saying, and even when I hear you talk there, I'm just I if I were to poll a random 100 people that were at these things, I don't know how many of them would even know the names of the organizers. And so I'm trying to figure out if the because I happen to think that political operatives astroturfed this idea of this convoy through half truths and sort of inflamed a bunch of people that were waiting to be inflamed to get into action. But I think most of those people that have been activated probably don't have any idea who Tamara Litch is. And so I don't know how to separate or whether I should, because I don't quite agree with you in the way that you characterize, like, I agree with you on who the organizers are.
Right.
I
It's the
don't
brush
know, but
painting.
yeah, the broad brush thing. Because even Tamara Litch, I look at her bio and I'm like, well, these are all things that I wouldn't do with my spare time, right? But are they illegal? No.
They're not. It's not
Are
illegal.
they? Yeah, it's not illegal. The Wexit Party.
Not
Probably
illegal.
there's a lot of people that have racial issues in that party, but like it itself is not illegal.
Well, being
So
racist is not illegal either, right? So
that's right. That's
yeah.
right. And I don't know if it should be or shouldn't be. I know that it's repugnant, and I'm just trying to figure out. Okay, let me try this from a different way. If you took all the antics of the convoy protests now, and you took all of their activist strategies, which ones are different and which ones are the same from the typical left wing protest? And what is the different reaction among authority figures, like the police and the government, among the for the two types of protests?
Yeah. Well, I mean, before I do that, let me just, if I can, just throw it kind of back to this, the rest of the convoy participant members. I mean, I'm not going to say that every single attendee there is a racist. I mean, that would not be. I mean, how do you even prove that? Number one. I mean, and I don't even think that would track anyway. But if you do ask them, what they're there for and what they want and the larger ecosystem into which they fit, it's the same things that we've been seeing on the anti-vaxxer front. I mean, even these people who are claiming that they're vaccinated, but we're vaccinated, but we're just against mandates. Well, I don't believe you. Number one, nobody's going to ask you to show proof of that, so they can just make these claims, and nobody will really take them to task for it. So certainly there are people. I mean, majority of people who are there in the convoy and supporters thereof literally, they believe that by mob action, we can force the government to change their policies. Okay. This leads
Yeah.
into their question you asked of me that on the left, even, it's the same idea. I mean, the idea that if you come out in numbers and march on the streets and demand change, change will come. And look, this is a very normal part of democracy, right? Like, I have no problems with hordes of people stacking up and being out in front of the parliament building, waving their flags and placards and everything else. Totally legitimate protest activity. But what is not legitimate is when you block roadways and you incessantly honk your horn all day and all night. Like that, then you're impeding on the rights of other people, as well, claiming that this is about freedom and charter rights, and then preventing the press at the same rally is not part of legitimate protest activity either. So this is where I think, in some leftist causes, we'll call them, this happens. Look at First Nations protesters blocking railroads, impeding traffic, so to speak. So one could say that there's a similar argument there, right? But look at the response, right? I mean, whenever there's a First Nations protest or whatever, we bring out the tactical teams, and there's all kinds of activity going around. Now people are saying, right, with this, because they weren't seeing much activity in the past few days, they were saying, well, look at the blatant double standard. I think the pressure that's been on the city of Ottawa, the mayor, the chief of police, you are seeing enforcement happening today. They've been handing out, hundreds of tickets, traffic related offenses. There are almost 100 criminal investigations open. The FBI is involved. Department of Homeland Security is involved because of the American far right that is also supporting this protest, and is now government officials are getting death threats and other types of threats. So now you see the responses moving towards the enforcement security side. So at the end of the day, look, the protesting is not a problem. I mean, the idea was that you would get a permit, and you would get the permit. It's not like they would say you can't protest. You would have got the permit, and then the city would have brought out porta potties so that you didn't have to shit in the streets or piss on a war monument, right? That's
Yeah.
why we have this method of doing protests, right? It's not to control the protesters or whatever else. It's just to manage it so that we don't see the debacle that we're seeing now.
Yeah, you know what's funny is that I lived in Toronto for many years. I moved up here 5 years ago. Otherwise, I spent most of my life either in the suburbs of Toronto or downtown. And I remember a protest at Nathan Phillips Square, and it was I always forget the name of that little religion, but it's that Tibetan religion.
Oh,
You
Falun
know how they
Gong.
always, yeah, and they always protest around the Eaton Center, basically, or they have their placards and stuff. Anyways, they
Totally.
they took over the space, and they took it over by kneeling in formation, like almost like a checkerboard kind of thing, like 300 with X's over their mouths, and they just stayed in the same position for like 10 hours. And I was like, this is fucking powerful.
It's a
And
sit-in. It's called a sit-in protest, right?
right, but the way they did it, they didn't move. They did not move. And I don't mean they talked to each other while they sat down. They didn't move. They were like frozen with X's over their mouths. And the point I'm trying to make is that like when I remember being called like a bigot from the left because I was like, I don't think Black Lives Matter should stop traffic because what if an ambulance has to go to the hospital? That was the argument I made at the time. And of course, as soon as you say something like that, they'd be like, fucking racist, hate you, and everything. Right. And it's like, I still feel that way. Like, about
so do
right-wing
I.
protesting.
So do I. I don't think it helps your cause when you're blocking somebody who's trying to go to a doctor's appointment or pick up their kid or whatever. It's just I don't support it.
And it feels like they're giddy about it because one of the things that I like to say, and I've been saying it for years, is that politics is basically the art of managing hypocrisy. And so I think you were totally right. If like the blockades when indigenous protesters were blocking railways, I would be willing to guess that 93% of this convoy were like speaking out against it just viciously.
Of course.
Just how could you shut down this country, this and that? And now here they are kind of doing the same thing, encouraging fellow truckers that are coming in from the States to disrupt the supply chain, which apparently was such a serious issue that was one of the motivating factors to do the protest to begin with.
Yeah. This is, well, can I
just
ahead. Quickly, like this is a chance to nerd out a little bit just in social psychology. There's a whole discussion on in-group, out-group dynamics. And when you are a part of a group, how you view the members of your in-group and how you view members of an out-group. And often what is the case is in what they call in-group, out-group bias is when the members of your group do something, even if the members of the out-group do the exact same thing, it will be viewed differently. So if, let's say, a member of an in-group commits a crime, it's not viewed so badly. But if a member of an out-group committed the same crime, it's worse. It's the worst thing ever. So there is this bias that we develop just as human beings when we become a part of a particular in-group, that we start to be very protective of whatever cause that in-group is representing. And so that's where you get these double standards and hypocrisy when you have the same kind of problem, but you're viewing it through a different lens.
Yeah, I like trolling people who really liked. I used to like trolling Trump fans when Trump was president because I would create this list of things that he did, but I would just put on top of the list that Justin Trudeau did all those things, and they'd be like, "See that fucking stupid libtard Trudeau? Look at all those things he did." And I was like, "Oh fuck, my bad. That was actually Trump who did all those things," and they would just block me.
Right. That's a perfect example of what we want to see. Right. Like we will accept what we already agree with. So confirmation bias, where we start to filter all the information that's out there through the prism of, does my group believe this or doesn't it? So if it goes against what I believe, well, I'm going to reject it. So you start to develop this bias where you funnel only the evidence and the information that you feel supports your position, and you reject everything else. All right. So if you say, that if like in your example, that's a perfect example where it's like, oh, because you're stating that somebody else that they don't like did this, so they immediately say, oh, we're against it. It's obviously trash and garbage. And then when you remind them, actually, your guy said this, it's like, oh.
Yeah. There's so many good Reagan ones because he was like a union, like he was like the head of the actors union. And when I used to say that, I'm like, yeah, Justin Trudeau. Fucking, that guy was head of the actor union, and they'd be like, "See, I told you he was a fag," or something stupid like that, right? Like they would say something like that. Sorry, I don't mean to say the F word, but like, that's what they would say. And then you're like, "Oh, actually, that was Reagan. He was the head of a union." And what bothers me about this is that for me, like, I think I'm really obsessed with this concept of polarization because I look through that lens all the time, not as a participant, but as a person that just notices that if this side says this, then that side just has to say that. They have to disagree. So I'm sort of left sitting here like it's no secret. Like on Dean's podcast, Lachlan and I are sort of a little bit more moderate than say Dean is on how we feel about all these protesters, and I
Dean's
think.
crazy. Dean's a crazy guy. He's a
Well,
mental person.
and I respect it because he's consistent and he's being honest. I just don't happen to like necessarily agree that it's like the best way forward. But
Yeah.
I don't know if it is or isn't. So asalu, do you right?
Mhm.
But I still get a little bit worried about civil unrest, and I get worried about the prospect of Canadians fighting against each other. And
Mhm.
because of your background, I'm just wondering, and maybe this isn't something that you necessarily have some sort of expertise in, but maybe you have an opinion. Do you remember, like in 2020 in the United States, with all the Black Lives Matter protests and George Floyd, and there was like in during that summer, I was like, are we doing this? Is this going to be a civil war between the right and the left? Is that coming? And thankfully, it kind of never came. There was a little skirmishes here and there, but are you worried about that kind of thing for Canada?
Not. I'm not worried to the level that I am with the U.S. I mean, obviously the political contexts are different, our histories are different, and so there are a lot of factors that are very different than the U.S. And it's why we are, we're Canadians, right? We're not. There's like a very clear difference, yeah, especially when people go abroad, or at least that's the stereotype, right? The Canadian is always the polite, nice person, whatever. But um, if you're seeing what's been happening in the past several years, especially with Trump and Trumpism, it's feeding it more and more. And I don't think we're going to get to that point, mostly because there aren't that many of them here. Like there are more than enough. Not to say that they can't, cause some serious damage if they all decided to do that, but I really don't see that as much up here. I mean, take for example the fears at the beginning of this convoy, where you had people openly encouraging terrorist attacks on the Parliament Hill. That Diagolon podcasters or whoever basically saying, "I want to see a truck ram through the Parliament building walls." That I'm just It's just incredible that they can get away with saying stuff like that. Like that is clearly incitement of terrorism. You can cheerlead the January 6th attacks. You can say it was wonderful what happened there. It was legitimate political discourse, as the I think the GOP are trying to spin it as. But you cannot then say, because I mean it depends, because it wasn't technically classified as a terrorist attack. I mean, but I mentioned this elsewhere. This came up once with Aaron Driver, who was an ISIS convert in Winnipeg, who after the Parliament Hill attacks happened, um, he was celebratory. He was good with it, and so
Mm-hmm.
we come to understand that you cannot incite terrorist activities here in Canada. So even with that, there was this fear, and the fear that was kind of shared by the Ottawa police, that, well, we don't want to antagonize these people who are potentially violent, right? But to be fair, there wasn't really anything violent that came out of this convoy, and that's deliberately so. They know that they need the support of Canadians in doing that. They screwed up when it came to the not just the horn honking, but what was being done to the war monuments and Terry Fox. People didn't want to see that, right? And so that turned a lot of people off from the convoy. But uh, like I said, it has not been violent, and so I hope that's an indication that we just won't see that level of violence up here.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that don't like hearing you say that, like there hasn't been violence, because I've said that
Well,
as well, and people have been like,
yeah.
that horn honking, and I'm like, I get it,
Well,
like it's
yeah,
it's
right.
it's fucking annoying. You want to like kill people, I get that, but this expanded version of the like definition of violence is,
Yeah.
I find, an indicator that you are so against the issue that they're there for, is that you'll just say that that's violence.
Yeah.
Now, if we circle back to extremists, there is a big difference between the government looking at people because social media posts may have made them suspicious or whatever, and stating implicitly that we have terrorists in Canada that are just like plotting attacks, right? Like when it comes to like what we're defining as as domestic terrorism, and I'm talking about the Caucasian, white supremacist kind of terrorism. How serious is it? And have there been like crimes committed, or are there like red flags? Like how are we
Yeah.
looking at this as an overall picture?
Yeah, so this is a good point because people talk shit online. All right, that's what they've been doing ever since the internet was created. I remember back in the early '90s, I was even on the internet. It was still a chat-based forum at that time, Yahoo
Mm.
chat, AOL chat, and people talk shit online all the time. And that's the problem is that you have all this volume of what you see as threats or potential threats, but the concern is always, well, how many of those people are actually going to do something about it? And so, even with all this talk of the convoy, none of that happened. Nobody's ramming into anything and whatever else. Now, you raise another important point about violence and what constitutes violence. And look, we all understand when we say, or at least when I'm saying violence, we're talking about like damage to property, damage to people, like assaults on people, and so on, in an organized manner. So you are seeing harassment of people. There have been simple assaults, what we call simple assaults of residents, of healthcare workers, of mall workers, or whatever else by individuals. But it's not organized, by the convoy group themselves. It's bringing that type of person to the convoy, and so that type of person will feel more confident and more comfortable in that environment. But when we talk about violence, we all know what we're talking about. We're talking about vehicle ramming attacks, or significant property damage, that sort of stuff. And look, it's important for us to be honest when it comes to this. I don't like. I'm against the convoy. Everything they stand for. I mean, what the organizers have put out, this and that. But I support their right to protest, and I clarified what I meant by that right to protest. Do it on the Hill. Don't bother. Don't block people. Don't incessantly honk your horns all day and all night. And so that's what we mean by violence. When we talk about in Canada in general, domestic extremism, it's definitely increasing. I put that up to the effect of Trumpism. I basically, told them that it's okay to be a jerk like this. But in Canada, I mean, the worst example of that was the Quebec mosque attack, the
Yep.
anniversary of which was on the 29th. It was on the Saturday. And, that little vigil that they planned had to be canceled because of the convoy protesters. But that was the worst attack where several people were murdered in the mosque. Many others were injured.
Yeah.
So that's the worst kind of attack we've seen. Then you saw the London family that was run over in a vehicle ramming attack by a neo-Nazi. So what's interesting is in the first case, they did not charge the person with terrorism, but it was a terrorist act. It just didn't have the legal charge attached to it. In London, for example, they added a terrorism charge because the guy must have blabbed something to the police. And so this is another thing when we use the word terrorism, like when people say that, the convoy, it's terrorism, that's not terrorism. That is not
Mhm.
terrorism. That's a big pain in the ass for sure, but
Yeah.
that's not terrorism, right? Like you need a significantly higher threshold of violence to occur for us to be using those words.
And there's also, and I think those two instances that you pointed out, the church, the mosque killings, and uh, the neo-Nazi who ran over that family. There is an important distinction, even though both could be classified as terrorism, between the lone wolf and the organized terrorist, right? That has like a political movement and an organization in mind. Just for people's like own, ability to be more informed, can you explain those differences that just between the lone wolf and how they can be considered terrorism, but just how it's different?
Yeah. Even remember when we say the term lone wolf, wolves are born in dens, right? There's always a family. There's always a larger ecosystem um, from which that lone actor is deriving their influence and their inspiration. So all
Right.
this means is just a person who decides to act out on their own. Still, it's in support of an organization or ideas that other organizations might subscribe to, and the person will just do it in support of that, or when they do it as part of a group per se. A third incident I could kind of point to, again, it's like the Muslims that are kind of getting the brunt of it, was the IMO mosque in Toronto, where an elderly guy was sitting outside, and a guy from the satanic neo-Nazi order called the Order of Nine Angels basically slit his throat, and
Oh,
killed him right there in the parking lot. So
fuck.
that's it's an individual who's acting out, but he is part of this group. And normally we look at this lone group and inspired attackers from the Islamist side, meaning like ISIS or Al Qaeda types, where you have this organization and a person is either a member of that organization and commits an attack, or a person who is a lone individual who subscribes to the views of that organization, is not a member per se of the organization, and commits an attack. Right. So
And terror groups often co-opt those guys. Like what was his name? Michael Z. Half Bebo, something like
right,
that.
right. Parliament Hill
The person
attacker.
that killed Cirillo in
Right,
on Parliament Hill.
right.
Um, he it felt like ISIS after the fact tried to retroactively say that he was one of theirs. But and they do that, right?
They
They'll
do that
make
all the
false
time. Yeah.
claims. Yeah. So
They
like
even tried to
that's what
claim
makes it tricky.
The Las Vegas shooter, who was a white guy, who like it was a really strange case, but they even tried to claim that they were behind that. So that's just
Yeah,
them exploiting the situation.
and that's another example. I don't mind actually that we're stepping away from the convoy to take a more broad brush talk about terrorism because I mean I've seen the memes. You've probably seen them too, and sometimes they apply where they have that terrorism chart, and it's just like skin tone.
Yeah, right,
And the darker you
uh,
are, the more likely you'll be a terrorist, and the lighter you are, the more likely it's got to be mental illness or whatever.
right, right.
And I understand what's behind that meme, and I largely agree most of the time. But I'm a stickler for like definitions, but I never really understood like the Vegas guy, for example. I don't think anything came out that said that he was doing it for politics or religion. So
Nothing.
but I remember arguing with people being like, why is it worse to be a terrorist than a mass murderer? Like, why? Why do
Yeah,
we care
that's
what
a
you call it?
really good question. Yeah, that's a really good question. Obviously, a mass murder is worse, right? Because you kill more people, you have more blood on your hands. You're
Mm-hmm.
worse. You can look at other cases as well, like for example, I think it was in Tennessee, where there was a guy who came out in his RV, and he basically blew up his RV. He actually, there was an announcement. It was like near the AT&T building, and they said, he subscribed to a bunch of conspiracy theories, but he really didn't fit, neatly in a particular category. And he
Mm-hmm.
announced, there was an announcement running from his vehicle saying, there's a bomb, it's going to detonate. This allowed the police to evacuate the area, and then he blew himself up. It's like,
Yeah.
so I came up with this term. Um, what was it? Suicidal bombing, a suicidal bombing. So the person
Oh
is,
yeah.
right, like usually a suicide bombing, which is technically, I would call it a homicide bombing or a homicide bomber, somebody who deploys a person-born improvised explosive device to kill others around them. But somebody
Mm-hmm.
who just deploys it to kill themselves, what's that? That's like a suicidal bomber. And we had this even in the UK. There was a guy who blew himself up outside of a hospital. I don't know if people remember that. There was a taxi driver, and he basically locked the guy
Yeah.
in there and took off. And so, like, why did that guy detonate over there, right? Like, so that's another case of somebody like just killing themselves. So you have these tactics that people use, which are sometimes also used by terrorists, right? So does that necessarily make them a terrorist? Like, this is all
And we're so
semantics.
hung up.
And
We're so hung up on the
yeah,
definition, and I know there's some important reasons like the legalities after the fact, what kind of charges and how that impacts their rights and everything like that. So I understand, why it's important to law enforcement and to the crown attorneys and things like that. But Dude, if I don't give a shit what the Vegas motive is. He's an evil piece of shit, and
Well, this raises another like line of discussion where it's like, do we just get rid of terrorism completely? I mean, if a terrorist succeeds, they've committed murder, right? So there's homicide. We already have homicide charges. If in the Edmonton they did this with the ISIS attacker who used a rental truck and tried to kill like 5 people, tried to get out and murder a cop. They didn't charge him with terrorism. The guy literally had an ISIS flag in his cab, but
yeah.
they charged him with 5 counts of attempted murder. And 5 counts of attempted murder are going to get, that's easy. Those are easy charges, right? They're known charges. It's very so. There's another line of kind of inquiry of, do we just get rid of terrorism charges in general and just leave it at either murder or attempted murder or weapons charges or other kinds of charges?
Like I know the terrorism problem existed long before 9/11, but 9/11 and the wars that came post 9/11 were might be the reason why we're so hung up on the word terrorism. Remember, we had the terror likelihood chart that they would show on CNN and
Yep,
Fox, and it was color
right. The
coded.
color the
That
color
was
chart.
that was just completely designed to make people afraid, I think. And then there was and then Bush, of course, famously declaring a war on an adjective, on a tactic,
Yeah.
or whatever. It doesn't have a specific enough definition for people not to fight about it. Do you know what I mean? And now here we are. What, like, he's a terrorist? He's not a terrorist. It's too much. And that just the reason why I'm even talking about this is because there's a lot of that word is flying around a lot right now, and I'm just like, okay, I would believe any evidence that people bring forth that shows that there are terrorists right now in Ottawa. But without that really malleable definition of
No,
terrorism, I don't see
terrorism
it.
would not apply. It would not apply in this case. You can use extremists. You can get away with using that word.
Yeah.
Extremist is just somebody who believes that, taking violent action or taking, let's call it, I don't want to call it abnormal action, but I mean, anybody that believes that you should, that we should pile on and lay siege to Ottawa to force the resignation of the government, that is
Yeah.
not a normal belief. I mean, we live in a
No.
democracy where we get rid of our leaders through elections, right? That's extremism, right? To believe that, this is allowed and this should be done, or the idea that, I mean, I just saw a member of provincial parliament in Ontario talk about, if we win, we will get rid of the mainstream media. And it's like, you want to use state power to determine which media companies are allowed. Like, that is literally communism.
I
And
know.
yet you hear a lot of these folks talk about communism, that we're in a state of communism. And it just shows they really have no idea what these terms mean. Maybe this is why it's important that we have a discussion on definitions, because people use terms not understanding what they actually mean. And so they're misapplying the labels, right? So, and this relates to all sorts of things. I think I made the comment that we need civics lessons big time in Canada for people to understand like how our democracy actually works.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember Richard Dreyfuss talking about that on like Bill Maher like 15 years ago. Before Trump, before all this shit, like about how the removal of civics from the classroom, especially, I guess he's talking about the United States, but
Mm-hmm.
the same would apply here, maybe to a bit of a lesser extent, maybe not anymore. But how when we removed civics lessons from the classroom, people just forgot what politics was. And now we have awakened these former apathetic people who never had politics in their life, and they have been awakened with that sort of mega pixie dust. And it's so funny because I'm not as hard on the truckers, but whenever I find out someone is like a real big admirer of Donald Trump, I just let him have it. Like if that man represented, excuse me, every single issue that I cared about, I'd still think he was a fucking dangerous douchebag. I don't know why anyone follows him. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but the good news is, just as it was on January 6th, when you don't send your best and brightest to take over the government, eh,
Yeah. Well, this is unfortunately for the U.S. They've tolerated this demagogue for so long that the horse is out of the barn, right? I mean, it unleashed uh, damage, which we're seeing the results of it. We're dealing with its consequences up here. I think Trumpism is one of the biggest factors of why you see this giant jump in the far right. It actually started with the election of Barack Obama. I think it was hate group membership went up like 350%. Because I mean,
Yeah.
black guy, maybe secret Muslim, becoming
Oh, do you
president, right?
remember?
Oh
Do you
yeah, I
remember
mean,
all this stuff they said?
oh,
Like,
do I?
dude, there was a point. I just looked this up. I don't know, maybe a month ago or something. But there was a point where it was such a ridiculous number. It was something like, and I'm conservative on this estimate because I know it was either this or higher, but it was like 37% of Republicans thought Obama was the Antichrist.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
I
probably because they thought he was Muslim. I think because there's a
Yeah.
huge. Some of them are just real wackos when it comes to this stuff. But yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to just put all the blame on Trump. I mean, this is something in the U.S. that's been going on for, since Reagan really, opened up the floodgates for evangelical organizations. I
Mhm.
think it was around that time when they were like classified as charitable organizations. But you
Yeah.
see these churches in the U.S. They're political. They're all political organizations. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Go ahead.
no, just saying that like it's incremental changes that have been taking place and sudden changes vis-a-vis Trump that we now find ourselves where we are today.
Well, you're in good company when you say that. It started with Reagan, because that's what Noam Chomsky said on this show. Exactly that. Because I said, did this start with Obama's election and Sarah Palin, and did that sort of pave the way for the Tea Party, which paved the way for the normalcy of, and then Trump came in, and he was like, no, it started with Reagan, and for the exact reason they allowed extremist Christian money into politics in a way that had never been seen before. And I can't remember the author of the book, but there's a book called The Power Brokers that you should read because it is all about how religious money is used to like whatever Russia has done, whatever the evidence shows that Russia has done to interfere into
Oh yeah,
AstroTurf and all that kind of stuff,
yeah,
they are doing the same thing.
yeah.
It's they are also riling up their own supporters often with abortion talk and they to their credit they had a president that would listen to them, albeit for reasons that they didn't share and motivations that they didn't share, but he did tilt the court enough for states to start becoming emboldened to start thinking of stripping away Roe versus Wade and things like that. So it's like, I don't know how close they're getting because it's difficult to tell because we have a media that seems to be really interested in just sort of fanning flames themselves. Everyone is doing the same thing right now. And it sounds conspiratorial, but it feels like the media wants to divide us. They want to keep us afraid. The government seems to want to divide us. They want to keep us afraid, mostly through the party political apparatus. Is that it? Is that the method now? We're all sort of like terrorists on a spectrum,
Yeah.
trying to keep people afraid, you know?
Yeah, it's weird because like even talking about just on the Christian money, for example, you can see how that attitude has spread to Canada as well, and it's no accident that this clown Pulowski um, was gallivanting around with Michael Flynn, all the MAGA network people. So he
Mm-hmm.
goes over there, he develops his network, they create more of a support structure. Now here we are today. It's all MAGA types who are supporting the convoy. I mean, like look at it, pro-insurrection types on top of that, right? Trump Jr., Michael Flynn, Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham. Like the word Paul Gosar just gave out a shout out support for Pierre Poilievre's leadership run. So it shows you that there is a coming together of the GOP in the U.S. and the Conservative Party in Canada. Now, let me just say, is that any different from the Liberal Party getting together with the Democrats? The answer is no. It's the same thing that's happening, right? So, and that just shows you, and that comes back to your point about is the politicians in general is that there is a mechanism at work here, right? With the media on one hand and politics and politicians on another. The media is set up to, I consider, I don't want to, again, I'm not, the enemy is the press of the people, absolutely not. But there's a well-known saying in media: if it bleeds, it leads,
Mhm.
right? If
Yeah.
it's as horrible and awful, and to put that shit out there, right? I always remember, and I always tell this story, and I'll never forget it, that this was after the Manchester Arena attacks that took place in the UK, and I was on, I think, CNN or somewhere, talking about the issue. And I was in the studio, and I'm watching the camera up at the top, like where I'm supposed to look at for recording, and then below is the camera below, and that I can see what. And as I'm talking, I'm looking halfway, right? And I can see that while I'm talking, trying to explain radicalization or whatever it is, they keep showing on a loop images of people in distress, in anguish, in pain. And I realized that the media, and there, this is a quote, media gives terrorism a longevity it might not otherwise enjoy. Okay, so that it spreads it, it recycles it. And so here I am trying to make sense of what's happening, informing the people, and yet they're just keeping this stuff on a loop, which is reinforcing the trauma, the collective trauma that we're all feeling. So that's what media does on one hand, and then politicians on the other hand are only interested in power, in obtaining power and keeping power. And so they will hitch their wagon to whatever convoy they find is going to be beneficial to their political power. And so these aspects are two very nefarious and destructive aspects, I think, which will continue the chaos that we see.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think the political posturing that we've seen from premiers and from Trudeau since this this has started has really exposed us as a country without leaders. Like I don't, and I'm really disappointed in Jagmeet in a way because I don't know how his advisors are feeling about the gigantic vacuum that he could step in right now and show that he's a better leader than the prime minister and try to, you know, try to play politics a little, but do it in a way that's a little bit more constructive. What did you think of O'Toole being ousted, and do you think that because I have my own opinion on this. I want to hear yours first, though. How do you think that makes their prospects for the next election, given it's probably going to be within the next year?
Well, I mean, I try not to be a political commentator. I have to say all these caveats up front because I really do like, for me personally, public safety, national security, defense, stuff like that needs to be nonpartisan. Like, you can't come at this with a political lens. Um,
Okay,
and
that's good. I don't want you to do that then. How about this, though? I'll
yep,
flip
no,
the
no,
script a little bit. How
okay.
do governments differ? Like, how does the conservative government and the agency apparatus that they, I guess, would oversee, is there a difference in strategy between how the conservatives would run that apparatus versus the liberals, or do both sort of like take their cues from the agencies?
Yeah, I think the professional politicians among them understand, and they will take direction from the agencies and the intel reports that they get. You can say, like, I mean, this came up with when, I think it was a couple of years ago, when the discussion of ISIS returnees, potential ISIS returnees to Canada first came up. It was former Minister Baird, John Baird, and Premier Kenney, actually, Jason Kenney, who their statements were excellent. They were on point, and you could not tell the difference if it was a conservative politician or if it was a liberal one saying these words. I could have switched the wording and just put a different person's. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So at one level, there is a level of professionalism where they do that, but there is, of course, a difference in which in the manner in which political parties decide to do things. Generally, you can say the conservatives want to be more enforcement heavy when it comes to this
Mhm.
stuff. Whereas the liberals want to be more situational. They want to
Root
understand
cause.
the root causes, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Great, great. Which is funny because when Harper said, former Prime Minister
I
Harper,
remember.
now was not the time to commit sociology. What's funny
Yeah.
is that the government was literally at the time funding a sociologist to do counterterrorism research.
Yeah,
So,
I remember
so
that
yeah. So,
because Trudeau was like, I think we want to know what the root cause is
mhm.
of these
It was
people who
after
are
the Boston
troubled.
Marathon bombing that he
That's
said
right.
that.
And Skippy Pierre Poilievre was like, the root cause of terrorism is terrorism.
Terrorists, right?
It's like
Yeah. So,
that is making it not that
so
complex
it
at
just
all.
shows you like which politicians are going to do it just for the politicking and
Yeah,
to advance their narratives and rhetoric, as
yeah.
opposed to those who are actually informed.
I, and just back to the media for a moment, because I want to talk about we have about 14 minutes or whatever. I want to talk a couple of things, but the one reason why the media has really been bothering me is because they make it seem that, like Nazi stormtroopers are about to fucking take over this country. Like the headlines are ridiculous, and but I am reminded of how the media reveals itself as left or right. They just do. They are living in the polarized world that they helped create. Because I saw this, and then for those who are not watching but are listening, it said CNN still frame, and it says fiery but mostly peaceful protests after police shooting, and there's like a city block on fire in the background, but the headline indicates, yeah, it's all good. Sure, there's a bunch of businesses on fire that were arsoned because protests were getting out of hand, but hey, mostly peaceful. Um, are we ruining? Is everything being ruined by ideology? That's the easiest question. That's the most softball question I've ever given anybody. But but please, if you will, hit that out of the park for me, Mubin. Is ideology just spoiling all aspects? But specifically with media, because you can get mad at the True North Center or whatever that outlet is called, or Fox News or Toronto Sun, and I'm like, yeah, I don't like them either. They're cheap, and they're waving pom poms for one side. But the side that I find less repugnant, which is the left, they're horrible in different ways, but less repugnant, I would say. They're doing the exact same thing.
Yeah,
Like,
well, yeah, this comes back to your in-group, out-group dynamics, right? And if I can say, let me see if I can get away with this. In the US, you'll find that the mainstream media, let's call them that, is mostly liberal, whereas in Canada, it's not, right? So you can
are you
see
sure about
even
that?
now. Oh yeah, oh yeah. If you
Give
look
me, give
at,
me, what do you mean by
I'll
that?
give you a
Expand on
perfect
that thought a little
example.
bit.
I'll give you a
Mm-hmm.
perfect example. If you just compare election endorsements.
Mm.
So I'm going to call them out. Like Post Media, for example, is notorious for this. If you look at the election endorsements in the last several elections, you will see the vast majority of them supported the Conservatives, and openly so. Remember when they were putting Harper on the front page and saying vote for Harper? Basically, they had editorials like, and there's a list. There's
Well,
a
Post Media
graph
is
that,
not surprised. Post Media is not surprising.
right. Well,
They're the
right,
conservative
right,
conglomerate in this country. I
right.
got to tell you though, just and then continue after I rudely cut
Yeah.
you off here. But the boards of places like Torstar and the Globe and Mail are often full blue conservatives, and the orders for endorsement will often come from them and not the editorial staff. But go ahead.
Mhm. Yeah, no, no, for sure. But I'm saying that like you had some editorials which were like openly calling for them. And to be fair, there are many journalists who work in those platforms who were like, listen, this is not cool, right? Like we were trying to remain above the fray, whatever. I only mention that just to show that when you're talking about media and are we lost to ideology? And this is something that even media organizations, I mean, they also have their own outlook, their own way in which they're going to spin a particular story, right? So like, this is a great example of showing the CNN thing, which was, trying to show that they were mostly peaceful, which they were, which they were. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
but the reality is that the burning building is going to get the media attention, right? Even if it's only 4 or 5 or 10 out of so many protests in so many different cities. But then on the other hand, you get people who portray it as, oh, when BLM was burning down major U.S. cities, it's like, there were some arson attacks that took place in a few places. It's not burning down entire cities.
Well,
So
but imagine if one little tiny store was burned down in Ottawa. Imagine the headlines on CBC or Global.
that's right. That's
You
right.
know?
And luckily we didn't have that again. But your earlier question about do we hope to see or do we expect to see that level of violence up here? We don't, right? Just like the BLM rallies and marches that we had up here, there was nothing like that. There was nothing like that because our situation is very different, I think, from the U.S. And so I hope it remains that way. That there's not going to be any major acts of violence, whatever. I do believe, though, that out of all of this, what it's doing is it's radicalizing people even more. It's giving the idea that this this convoy has all this support, which it doesn't, claiming that there were 50,000 trucks and 1.4 million protesters, and it wasn't that, right? It was
Theo
like 200.
Fleury can't be wrong.
Yeah,
Stop it.
bro. Okay. And then I even saw other mainstream. So I saw even, I think it was Associated Press, New York Times, saying that, oh, convoy protests grow across Canada, right?
Yeah,
And it's
this is
like, well,
NBC. This
yeah,
is Global Finance and Trucker
yeah,
Convoy. Anyways, yeah, the headlines. I've seen headlines as
yeah.
well from the BBC that was like,
Yeah, so
you
we're
know,
not, I mean, saying that
yeah,
hundreds more truckers were coming to Ottawa, and it's like, no, hundreds of more truckers did not come to Ottawa. They are even in Quebec. I like what they're doing in Quebec. They're setting up truck inspection stations outside and they're towing people. They're like, we don't care. We're going to tow you. In
yeah.
Toronto, they've closed off a bunch of streets. Their healthcare workers are out in force protesting against whatever. So, they're not amounting to much, but they've drawn enough inspiration from the Ottawa spectacle that this will have legs. Plus the MAGA funding and MAGA operatives who are pushing this, it will eventually cause at least one person to act out in a violent way. And so I'm sure that there's going to be an incident, if not a couple, but all in all, it's not going to be as violent as a lot of people were expecting.
It's interesting because even though like, and this is where nuance is dead, right? But like when I was trying to say something the other day about how if counter protesters show up in Ottawa, they will largely be to blame for any subsequent violence that comes out. And people got really mad at me. I got a bunch of emails and stuff, but that's what I believe. Like, I mean, if you're second to the party, it's like if there's a fight going on in hockey and there's two people fighting. In this case, the analogy would be that the trucker convoys are fighting with the system itself, or whatever you want to call it, the government. And then all of a sudden, that third man in, and he starts punching one of the hockey players that's fighting a guy already. That's how I look at counter protesters. It doesn't. I don't. Maybe it's just that I'm getting to the point now where I don't give a fuck why you're protesting. Just do it in a way that doesn't impact other people's
Yeah.
freedoms.
Well, this is
You
why
know?
I really commend the counter protesters in Vancouver for what they did. They blocked off the trucks with their bicycles. They just walked out onto the road and they just blocked the road. Now you can't
Yeah.
go anywhere, and now the trucks can't go anywhere either. Nobody's don't confront anybody. Don't go up to the truckers. Don't start having that one-on-one. That will, I agree with you, that will trigger one thing and it'll just snowball and then it becomes out of control. There's a way to do it peacefully without confrontation, and that's the best way to do it. um,
And
but
as
in
much as I
Ottawa,
love
yeah,
that little old lady that's I think it was in Ottawa, could have been Vancouver, that stood by herself in front of that truck. The fucking Tiananmen Square
yeah,
comparisons were
right,
a little
imagery
over the
comes
top.
up. Right,
Fuck.
of course.
Come on.
But it just,
Gladys was
what,
just about to go get tea, and that
yeah.
other guy was executed. So
And
let's
in
not.
fact, let me just because this I was reminded of this, since we're trying to be nuanced and we don't want to make this about right and left, and we want to condemn tactics that are wrong, no matter who does it. In Winnipeg, you saw what happened in Winnipeg. It was a
Does
driver.
anyone ever see what happens in
Yeah,
Winnipeg? You're going to
well,
have to tell me.
well, in Winnipeg, a driver from Manitoba. Don't know why he was in Winnipeg, but he ran over 4 Freedom Convoy protesters. They
Oh, I
had
did see that. The
Yeah, they
white
had
truck,
minor
right?
injuries. Yeah, it was a white Jeep Patriot. Minor
Yeah.
injuries, but
Shit.
still,
Are you kidding? Hold on. Just
yeah,
just let me back up for a second.
yep,
The Jeep in question that ran over the protesters was called a Patriot. The Patriot. That's the name of the vehicle.
It's the name of the vehicle. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, go.
Okay, that's what you caught on. All right. So the Jeep
Sorry.
Patriot driver, yeah, basically, struck, like deliberately struck four protesters who were there, and he got charged with multiple offenses, of course. But I don't want to get into this. You know what I mean? Like, what we need to understand is what the protest is really about. It's got nothing to do with truckers. It's just these are all anti-Trudeau types who are just having a tantrum. That's ultimately just support, and it's all supported by MAGA operatives in the U.S. and Canada. That's why you're seeing Confederate flags, "Don't tread on me" flags, Trump flags, U.S. flags. That's what it is. All right, that's what the protest is about. We don't need to make it into something worse, because already what it represents is something bad, right? The idea that, the governor general should dissolve the parliament, and, like, it's ridiculous stuff. These are not reasonable demands for people, right? So it's no wonder Trudeau is not going to. Why would Trudeau go and meet with people who has "fuck Trudeau" signs and
Oh, I
Trudeau from the
wouldn't
news
meet.
signs? Like,
Yeah,
this,
yeah. I
these
don't think
people are
Trudeau
not.
should meet with them.
Yeah, these people are
But
like,
yeah.
yeah, so these level of threats, I mean, open depictions of assassinating the prime minister, for example, I don't know how that's allowed. You can have, you can say and have "fuck Trudeau" flags all you want all day long, but like with a noose and things like that. So that's where this whole threat environment comes from. That people who believe in this sort of stuff, those are extremists, right? That's extremism. And
Yeah,
so
anytime you wanna say fuck and then place a politician after that word, like I,
that's normal. That's
I've
very normal.
I don't.
That's not illegal.
I,
That's very
no,
normal.
no,
And
no. It's not. I'm not making a
right,
legal argument here, and
okay,
it's funny coming from me because I don't really have much shame, but I don't like the etiquette or something. I don't like reading that sign. And I'm not a big political correct guy, but it makes me less likely to take you seriously if you have a "fuck Stephen Harper" sign or a
yeah,
"fuck Justin Trudeau" sign. I'm just like, you don't have me.
yeah,
And I think a lot of people are with me on that. I think that, and I think that that's a problem in a sense because it's like I really would love to learn about why you're there, but as I've said before, this is like, and you just said it, you're totally right. It's like a salad bar of things to hate Trudeau for. And you
yeah.
can just pick his socks and you're part of the convoy, or you can pick mandates and you're part
Well,
of the
it
convoy.
was what it was. It was socks, his hair, his eyebrows at one point,
Remember, they thought
uh,
his eyebrows were
the
like,
swing set in the back, in the backyard.
God, yeah,
It's just, yeah. So I don't know what else to say, but look, we're
that's all
all
right.
fed up. We're all fed up with this COVID crap. It's been 2 years. I believe the worst is over. We are going to move towards out of lockdowns, and hopefully, I mean, God willing, that's what I say anyway. Hopefully, we don't see some crazy variant mutation that comes out and just like lays waste to everybody. So we're almost there, and I kind of I wonder if they're going to take credit for it right at the end of it, say that, oh yes, it was because of our occupation.
That's
That's
exactly
why.
right.
Yeah. So
And these wind downs were planned for the last couple weeks, and yeah, they're gonna, that's like Forrest Gump, like they're just gonna like they're gonna gump their way to some sort of success, like when he wiped his face with that shirt and said "Have a nice day," and the other guy invented the shirt.
right,
That guy
right.
was a shirt inventor before he got there, Forrest. Um, Mubin, this is your podcast.
It is.
Spies Like Us, dude. What do you rank now? Aren't you like, I don't know what category you're in,
I don't
but
pay attention to
you're,
that stuff.
oh,
I
okay,
just do my
because
stuff. Yeah.
okay, but you know what? Then keep doing your stuff because I was told that you're like you're basically number one in whatever category that you're in. But either way, don't think about that stuff. You're right. Sorry, I brought it up. I try not to look at the rankings. Number 62 in my category, last I heard.
Yeah.
But no, but I loved having you, man, and we'll have you back again. I think I appreciate your insight. I appreciate being able to talk with someone who also thinks that this protest is basically peaceful because I've been getting yelled at by a lot of people for saying that
Mhm.
recently. It's still populated by a lot of people that you probably don't want to hang out with, and I don't want to hang out with.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Mostly
no, but
bad
it's good.
people.
Mostly
Mostly.
bad people.
Yeah.
Mostly bad people who haven't killed anyone yet. So
Yeah.
that's a
Great.
silver
Great.
lining.
Keep the
Small
yeah.
silver
Keep it.
lining.
Keep it. We can Keep it awful but lawful.
Yes, there you go. All right, moving. Thanks, man. I
All right.
appreciate you having on the show.
Peace
Thank
out,
you,
man.
buddy.
Take care.
Peace. Mubin Shaikh, he's a friend of the show, friend of the network. I love having him on just to have his expertise. He's a counter-terrorism expert. His bio, pretty well known. You should go check out his podcast. Once again, his podcast is entitled Spies Like Us. And yeah, and we are out. Tomorrow, we have Kareem Assad on the show, which is going to be awesome. And we're going to see what Kareem has been doing. Just a quick little preview of that. She got her GoFundMe account pulled by GoFundMe, and it happened either the same day or less than a day after Parliament had decided that they wanted to summon the executives from GoFundMe to answer questions from a Commons committee. So I'm going to come out with an article soon, tomorrow, actually, about how I think, all speculation, that GoFundMe is preempting the accusation that they're being favorable to left-wing political causes when they get asked questions by the conservatives, and will be able to point to arbitrarily ban people like Karima because they want to be able to say while they're talking to the Commons Committee, no, we are an even-handed fundraising platform. So tune in for that. And yeah, that's tomorrow, 1 p.m. Okay, guys, have a good one.